I guess I'm 2 years into my ADHD journey now. I always kind of thought I was broken or not right. You know, my brain from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed doesn't turn off. It's always doing something. It's like a radio on in the background. If you allow it to rule your life, it's easy to slip into addictions. It's easy to slip into negative behaviours, to do things that you shouldn't be doing. But my advice to anybody is absolutely go off and get the insight and understanding of what ADHD is.
Hello, my name's Charlie, the founder of Livedinsights, and welcome to the Livedinsights podcast. We're going to be having conversations with many different people on many different topics to get their insights, their experiences, their knowledge, their wisdom to help other people. Please tell friends, tell family, tell colleagues, and without further ado, let's crack on with this episode. Welcome to this episode of Livedinsights, and today's topic is primarily going to be about ADHD, although we will dip into other elements of mental health conditions, depression, anxiety. And my guest today is Trevor. Hi Trevor.
Good afternoon.
Also known as the bearded optimist. I don't know why.
I can't think why.
Yeah, fantastic. That is, well, the best beard I've ever seen. If I'm sure you get that a lot. But yeah, today's topic, ADHD. Now, you've told me that you actually haven't had a formal diagnosis, and I know that's actually quite common because a lot of the reason is because it's so difficult to get a diagnosis. But what makes you so sure that you have ADHD? And can you explain a bit more about, what it's like having ADHD?
Absolutely. I guess I'm 2 years into my ADHD journey now. I always kind of thought I was broken or not right, that my brain didn't work properly, and just beat myself up for far too many years. I'm lucky enough to have a wife who works with neurodiversity in children. Okay. And for the last couple of years has been sort of hinting at me that I've got ADHD and I'm on the scale. And in the beginning, it probably felt like death by 1,000 cuts. But eventually a penny drops and you think, okay, maybe there is something to this. And you go off and you explore and you understand. And you start to see pennies dropping about why you do certain things, why your brain never turns off. Mm-hmm. You ask me if I've got it, and everything that points to it makes sense that, my brain from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed doesn't turn off. It's always doing something. It's like a radio on in the background.
Yeah.
How I see time is terrible. My time blindness that, I'll see a journey that takes 45 minutes and I won't factor in getting in the car or that kind of stuff.
And do you recognise that all your life? Or
yes.
Is it...
Looking back now, back at my, my life and how I thought and how I perceived issues and problems, and it all makes sense now, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it's not all bad. I mean, my brain, the fact it never switches off, I can now use that because it makes me more creative. My problem solving, if you walk through simple things like walking through a crowd at a festival, I can see the path. Now, maybe that's because I'm 6'4", but my brain is looking for that connection. If I'm in work, I'm solving problems, and my brain is looking at things differently. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding what I have and how I am and who I am, I've embraced it completely.
So before a couple of years ago, ADHD wasn't even on the radar. Didn't think about it. Didn't know anything about it. But now, although not formally diagnosed, pretty sure you have.
Yes.
Is it a relief?
It's a massive relief. It's an embracing, and do you know what? I love myself. I understand myself better now. Why my brain works certain ways, why I get frustrated, why I get tired. Mm-hmm. And now that I understand that, I can put in mechanisms that support me with that. Okay. Before it wasn't a thing. Yep. I suffered hugely with anxiety, depression. The depression was really bad. I mean, 10 years ago, I quit my life. I was living in Ireland. Mm-hmm. I'd been married for 10 years. I had a great job. And it just got to a point where I was flirting and probably sort of embracing not being here anymore. Okay. Came really close a couple of times. Yeah. Days were really dark, frustration every day. I lost all, when I look at my depression back then, it was, my world had become grey. I didn't feel anything.
Did you recognise it was depression though back then?
No, just thought it was me because it comes on like dust, like gently at the beginning, and it builds into layers until it's too dark to see out. Mm-hmm. And I remember going away for a weekend and just hitting rock bottom and coming home. And on the way home, I rang my best friend and I said to him about this. And he said it was such a relief because he could see me not being myself and drifting away. And I think back then he said something to me that was really important. First off, he told me to go and see my GP and to get help with what I was. Yeah. But he said that I wasn't depressed, that I had depression, and that the two things were completely different. It wasn't who I was. It was something that I was suffering with. And it was like a cold or a flu, that you could take action and take steps to beat that depression. I went to the GP. I was prescribed with antidepressants. I took them for 4 days.
So no time, even if they were to work.
Well, at the time, I was going to an 80s festival in Hertfordshire with my best mate. So we decided we would go. And I didn't think a weekend of drinking with an Essex lad was a great idea. So I didn't take them. But over that weekend, I just opened up to him and told him everything, how I was feeling, how I was. And he just basically told me that I needed to make changes, which made sense in my head. And on the back of that weekend, I formulated a plan that 4 weeks later, I would quit my job, I would walk away from a marriage, I would throw all my stuff into a Honda Civic and drive home and start over. And if that wasn't the world that I wanted, if that wasn't the life I would start with a blank canvas and start over. And that was my cure for depression.
And that was by talking to somebody who listened and advised in a way that was helpful.
Absolutely. And it was tough because at that time I was living a great life. You know, we were going to great parties, we lived in a great house. And to the outside world, I was living this wonderful life that everybody wanted. And I hated it. But you couldn't tell anybody that. Nobody would listen and nobody would understand. But opening up and sharing exactly who I was and how I felt with somebody was a game changer.
That's interesting because with ADHD, I haven't got ADHD, I'm 100% sure. I don't know that much about it. I'm fascinated, I'm interested, I want to learn more. Depression, I do know a lot about it. I've had depression, I've been rock bottom, suicidal thoughts, years of depression. When I finally realised what it was, for me, and this sounds kind of similar to yourself with the ADHD, there was a huge sense of, it now makes sense. A relief, it makes sense. There was also a sadness that this is what I've got, this is what I've had, all those years of not knowing, not understanding, and there is no quick fix. It's going to take time and effort. But so it was a sadness, but also a relief, and now I can start to, on that journey of kind of dealing with it, managing it, overcoming it. With the ADHD, you said a sense of relief, but you saw that then as, this is all positive. Were there any negative sides to it?
Oh, there's loads of negatives. I'm sure if you ask my wife, she'll tell you all the negatives. The most understanding person and patient person I've ever met. I forget stuff. I know that my working brain is smaller than normal. I need to write lists, but she can have conversations with me that I will completely forget. And then when she reminds me, it's like a new conversation. So it's understanding and managing that. It's writing things down on a constant basis because I will forget things, that just normal conversations, things like picking my daughter up. If I haven't added that into my calendar, I won't remember it because there's a million other things going on in my head that consume that. I am relentless at times because my brain doesn't turn off. I talk a lot because I have all these crazy ideas and that can be exhausting sometimes. I interrupt when I shouldn't in meetings, and I'm learning how to deal with that as well. And it is challenging. It's a definitely, I mean, it's called a disorder, but I don't think it is. It's just neurodiversity, and I think it's just embracing that and how you then manage that on a daily basis.
So you've effectively self-diagnosed. Have you put in place particular treatments, particular things to do to help the condition? So
yes.
What would those be?
I'm blessed with a high level of self-awareness, which is a gift and a curse. Because if you're not doing great and you're self-aware, you just beat yourself up constantly. When I restarted my life, I decided that I would put in things that would support my journey back, both for ADHD and for depression. there's that analysis of a cup half full or half empty. My cup is refillable. So I'm constantly aware of what I'm putting in my cup, whether that's news, media, social media, which I think sometimes is absolutely terrible. But also, what things am I doing every day that's going into my cup? So planning adventures. I've just come back from Everest for the third time, which if you'd said to me 10 years ago, I'd have thought you were mad.
Yeah.
But it's achievable, and it's brilliant that you can do those things, and you build those levels of self-pride that you build those things. I get into an ice tub every morning. I started doing that about 2 years ago by looking at Wim Hof and thought it was mad. Started by cold showering, but the cold showering at some point during the summer doesn't make any difference. So I bought an ice tub that lives at the bottom of my garden, which is great because I've got a footpath. So people think I'm mad because I'm out there at sunrise. But it does
so every day,
every
morning
day without
you go in
fail.
there. And what's the sort of temperature?
It was 4.5 degrees this week, which is brilliant. It's terrible for the first minute, but it does three things. I find that my overall health is better. I get sick less often. I sleep much better. The second thing is it gives me that sense of accomplishment every day that I get in and I do it. I think the third thing is the biggest, is that voice in my head that tells me I can't. There isn't one single morning I want to get into that tub.
Yeah.
And every morning that voice says, I'll leave it for today, we'll do it tomorrow. And I listen to him and then I say, okay. And then I get in. And every day at the beginning of the day, I conquer that one small thing that says you can't.
But also, tell me if I'm not with this right, it gives you an element of control.
Yeah.
Which is important. And again, as I said, ADHD, I don't have personal experience, but given there's a lot of stuff going on all the time, the craziness, the thoughts, the brain's going all the time, I'd also suspect that there's an element of structure and routine to that, what you're doing every morning, which goes contrary to ADHD, but is helpful. Is that...
ADHD, I have two modes. I have hyper-focus, where for a prolonged period of time, I'm just focused on one thing. And it might be that I'm going to do something like art, and I go out and buy all the pens and all the paper and get it all set up, and then sit down at the desk and I'm completely bored and wander away from it. Or I just get completely distracted, and if I'm at the desk, I can't have things like my phone anywhere near, because I will look and I will get distracted. In the middle of a meeting, I will just completely switch off. I use an app called Forest, which keeps me focused. I grow trees, virtual trees, that then you turn into real trees. And that for 45 minutes absolutely keeps me in that space, and that's my discipline. Because discipline is the key to it. But like you said, it's about building structure and building things that you have to do into the day that build routine. And that's part of getting into that tub in the morning, is starting my day with something positive. And for the rest of that day, I know that I've got something proud of, and my mental state is more of a positive than a negative.
Okay. And just going back to the treks and the outdoors, obviously, for people who know me or have any insight into my life, a large part of my life has been the outdoors and the mountains, the expeditions and things. And I'm very aware of the huge benefits that can bring physically and mentally. You said you couldn't imagine that 10 years ago, but you've done loads of trips and treks, and I know you've got more in the pipeline. So tell me more about that, especially in relation to the depression and the ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, that all started with my father. So I lost my father to cancer probably 12 years ago. Okay. The only good side of cancer is that you get to have conversations with them before they go. And we went for a beer probably about 3 or 4 months from the end. And he told me off. He really tried to be. He was in the army. He was a major, really inspirational guy. And he told me that I was living too safe, that I wasn't saying yes enough, that when I got to his age, I would regret not doing things. And when I restarted my life, I kind of picked that up and took it away. And about 3 months in, I got asked to go and do Killy. Little baby hospice down in Coventry rang me up and said, do you want to come and climb Killy with us? And I said yes. Now, I didn't know what Kilimanjaro was when I said yes. I'd never slept in a tent. I'd never fundraised. I was massively terrified of heights at the time. And 18 months later, I found myself on the summit of Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
And it was that just say yes to something and all the pieces will fall into place. And again, as far as ADHD goes and my mental health from depression goes, that was huge because it did two things. I realised I could sign up for something and see it all the way through to the end. but also that piece, and you'll absolutely get this, that you are capable of so much more than you believe you are, that your body is amazingly capable. And not only in altitude and summiting mountains, but everything you do at work, everything you do every day, that you can really go above and beyond, and you can be really proud of yourself and do things you never thought about doing. And I've used that every single day. Hiking I love. I mean, the Peak District I think is a beautiful place, and if you given half a choice, and I know my wife pushes me out the door when she feels it coming, I'll get up there at sunrise, start a Mamtor, put a backpack on and be gone for the day. And what it does to I don't know what it is. It just, if you put me in a room and bad feelings and bad thoughts will start spiraling, put me out in the wilderness and I'm just coming up with plans and solutions, and I'm coming back a different person. There's definitely something to it, and I think,
does it help clarify the mind? As in, it helps.
It turns it off. It turns it off because you're only in that moment, and I think that's. I certainly isn't there that piece around depression and anxiety, that depression is the regrets of the past, anxiety is the fear of the future. ADHD probably sits in the middle of it, spinning a million thoughts. And when I'm out there doing these things, I'm only in that moment. I'm admiring, I'm probably trying to look where the next lake is that I can climb into, or where the next summit is that I can wander to. But you're absorbed in the moment that you're in for the entire day, and it just turns off my brain. It's one of the few things I found that does turn it off for the day, and it's quite lovely.
There's a lot of positives of ADHD and the focus on something, and a lot of top sportsmen, for example, sports people, for example, you find out they have ADHD because they're able to channel that energy and that focus into something, a passion, and to become extremely good at it. Do you think anyone, from your experience, with anyone with ADHD has to find some kind of outlet for their energy, a passion?
Absolutely. I think once you're aware of that energy and what you're capable of with that energy, I think you've got to do something with it, because if you don't, if I wasn't doing positive things, I would be doing negative things, whether that was some form of addiction, whether that's gambling online or drinking too much, which I've done in the past. I'm finding some way of keeping my mind busy to do something with. I when we did the trips, I totally did it as a passion project that I made the arrangement with Bernardo's. We're now doing 6 trips with Bernardo's. Wow. I went out to our business and I recruited them all. I talked to them on a daily basis. But, and my line manager stopped me going, "You're doing too much." And I'm like, "No, I'm not," because what I'm doing is taking the energy I have and using it in a positive way. Because if I wasn't doing this, I would be doing something detriment to myself. And this gives me something that builds something amazing. I'm learning new skills and I'm becoming really proud of myself and making a difference, which is massive, isn't it? When you start doing things for charity and for other people, that feeds into the positivity as well, and how I view myself.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, the question I was going to ask is, what would your advice be for anybody else in a similar situation, like recently diagnosed, perhaps had years of kind of not understanding, struggling with their mental health, not making sense of things, and perhaps they've either been formally diagnosed or, like yourself, kind of recognised this is what it is. What would you then advise them to do?
I think my best advice is learn as much as you can about ADHD.
Okay. So what did you do? Did you
I found a podcast called ADHD Adults UK. Run by 2 incredible guys with ADHD. I think they're both professors, but they talked about it in a way that I could understand. And I became obsessed with this podcast, and I listened to it. And the more I listened, the more things made sense to me. I think don't hide from anything. Be really open with yourself about who you are. Even the bad bits, embrace the bad bits, because when you start to understand those bad bits, you can then put mechanisms in place that you can make them better. Not better, but tolerate them. Or, I can have a morning where I do absolutely nothing and just my brain switches off and I become very lazy and lethargic. By understanding that I'm like that, I can then put things in place. I've had a conversation with my wife that says, when I'm like that, give me a kick and get me moving on something. And embrace all of the negative as well as the positive. And the better you understand ADHD and you understand your ADHD, the happier you become. I embraced it all, and I absolutely love myself now, even the bad bits. Because
do you think if you'd have understood about ADHD or been diagnosed, say 10 years or 20 years ago, it would have been different. I.e., you're now same age as me.
We're still in our prime.
Was that 35, 40?
20, I'm 25 again.
But there's an element of maturity, life experience, etc., etc. And from what you've said so far, there's a lot of very sensible, very kind of, yes, I would say sensible kind of acknowledgement of the situation and what to do about it and how to embrace it.
Yeah.
Do you think that partly due to your age now, life experience, or do you think if you'd have been diagnosed 10, 20 years ago, you'd have had a much better life because of these positive things that are happening now, you'd have had the last decade or so? I hope you're finding this episode interesting, informative and beneficial. And if so, please like, comment, subscribe, follow, and keep watching and listening to future episodes. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues. Also, if you can, go to the livedinsights.com website and fill in an online questionnaire. You'll be helping so many other people understand more about these different topics and issues. So remember, tune in to Lived Insights, the conversation, and the website. Thank you.
I think there's a few things to pull out from that, isn't it? I think I'd love to have been diagnosed as a child. Okay. How you go through school and attention in class, things like that. But I also think the world's moved on and changed, and there's now an acceptance for neurodiversity. We're seeing businesses now recruit on neurodiversity. There's an acceptance that it's okay to be different, and I think across the whole board with everything. So I think there's a huge part of me that would have been loved to be diagnosed earlier and to accept it myself earlier. I think anything would have been possible, and that's terrifying what I could have achieved. But also, I'm really sort of happy that I've embraced it now, and I've got some great years ahead of me where I've come to terms with my differences.
Okay. And in terms of your work and career employment, what have been the challenges with that, with ADHD, and what have been the good things? How has that helped, if it has?
I'm a store manager for the Co-op, and I think with ADHD, that's a real challenge because it's regular routine task. And my creative brain is desperate to go and do something, and we're sticking to a plan. Interestingly enough, along my journey where I've embraced myself, I'm now doing a completely different job. I'm now a project manager for the Co-op.
Okay.
I got out and got involved in our festival set up probably 5 or 6 years ago, and part of that I met one of our senior leaders who got into a conversation with me about this, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I didn't know. I didn't want to follow the career path of operations managers and working my way through it. I wanted to do something that was creative, had an impact on colleagues, that I could problem solve, and I could really just apply myself to. And he told me that project manager was the perfect role for me, and I started in January. Okay. I'm now working on a couple of store trials, and I come into work every day, and my creative, busy brain is perfectly suited for what I'm doing. I absolutely love what I'm doing, and I can't help thinking that part of embracing who I was opened up a vision of what I could be, because I knew where I was rather than trying to fit into a regular system, if that makes sense.
Okay. And before that change, would you say that the Co-op were helpful? They understood? Did you have conversations? Were there any issues, or did you just sort of get through it, become a functioning ADHD person?
No, I think Co-op has been brilliant, and I've worked for the business now for 9 years, and from a diversity and inclusion point of view, they are outstanding. I'm absolutely, and as a leader in that business myself, everybody is embraced for who they are. And supported for who they are. And there's so many mechanisms within the business for support. And I think what's been really nice now is, now that I have accepted myself and I'm openly talking about my neurodiversity and my challenges of mental health, to be able to feed that back and be a voice within the business for other people to be able to help. And I think that's been kind of wonderful.
Okay. Well, they're a huge company, and presumably tens of thousands of employees. So within that team, there must be hundreds of people similar to yourself. So do you get involved in anything to help others?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate for Mental Health Awareness Day and for Mental Health Awareness Week.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've seen through the trips now that we can take for me, the big piece was, I came up with the idea of the trips on a way down from Everest. I'd signed up and done Kilimanjaro, went back and did Everest Base Camp the following year. And on my way down, I had this absolute crazy idea called the 100 Club, that I would support 100 colleagues doing something on their bucket list that would go above and beyond. And I came back and in true Trev fashion, made it as big and complicated as possible. I recruited 20 colleagues to come back and do Everest Base Camp. We had 20 different charities, colleagues from every corner of the business, every area of the UK, with guys in Scotland, guys in Cornwall. 3 months in, COVID struck. And again, everything just stopped. So we just kept postponing, kept fundraising, kept being really creative. But I've always tried to be that person that supports other people. And then in that, which I probably don't see, you inspire people by doing above and beyond and doing things that just seem crazy. And yeah, that my idea was that we'd support 100. And what's really lovely is I'm at about 100 now. We've taken 60 colleagues out this year. We did a trip to Everest in 2020 and Mount Toolbox in 20. So we're there, but we've got another 50 to come out this year. So exciting times.
Wow.
But I think it's just that, I think where I've now, my point in my journey is that now I can now openly talk about my ADHD, my depression, my anxieties.
Yeah. Well, normally, the last question was going to be about what are the positives out of this? Because I always look for positives in any kind of situation, any negative situation. I'm a big believer that there are always positives. And it sounds like that's a huge positive, what you've just talked about, the trips, the people you've helped, the money you've raised, etc. And quite possibly, if you didn't have ADHD, depression, anxiety, none of that would have happened. So there's a great example of something positive. But are there any other positives you can think about or think that have come out from your issues?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we talk about that, absolutely. Without that creative thread and that energy that I have, the trips would never have happened. They just wouldn't. But I think there's also a piece around the belief that you can do it. Because people are going to tell you can't do it, and you just keep trying and keep pushing anyway. And sometimes it won't work, and sometimes it will. I think the other positive I've found is just my overall well-being of accepting who I am. That piece of just, this is me, and I'm happy with that. And I think that it's taken a long time to get to that place. Meditation helps as well. I can't recommend meditation highly enough. 10 minutes every morning, just calming the head.
How does that go hand in hand with the ADHD, where everything is, wants to do something, and meditation is the complete opposite?
It's the absolute opposite, and that's the challenging piece. It's it's sitting there for a guided meditation for 10 minutes to slow your breathing down, slow your mind down. Still one of the best things I ever read. There's a book about finding happiness, and I really struggled with sleep because my brain wouldn't turn off. And there's a piece in the book that talked about seeing your thoughts at night like clouds, that they sail across your thoughts and you just let them go like clouds. And it took me about 2 weeks to sort of get into this, not feeding energy into crazy thoughts at 2 a.m. But I do now. I see them as clouds and I let them go. And again, that's challenging your ADHD, challenging. You can accept it for what it is, but you've also got to challenge it in certain ways that make life easier and make life better. Everybody wants a piece of cake, but it doesn't mean you have to run and get the cake. It's about giving yourself a bit of discipline sometimes and saying, yes, I am thinking this way, but I don't have to react to it every single time. I can. It's like the Forest app on my phone. It stops me from being distracted, and you work out what works for you. And you use that, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah. Have you had, so once people are aware of your ADHD, has there been any negative comments, negative reaction? Do you still feel there's a stigma attached to it, or are we now in a position where either it's completely accepted, everyone's cool with it, or you just don't care? was it a mix of all of that?
I think so. And I think actually, I mean, it was probably the worst kept secret when I started telling people I've got ADHD, because everybody was like, we know. Well, how do you not know this? I've not come across any negative connotations of it at all. I think, again, it's that I think we live in a time now where you can embrace yourself. And as long as you are working on yourself, if that makes sense, if you're, you know, if you are using it and embracing yourself, then absolutely, I've definitely not come across any negative connotations for that.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good. So the depression and anxiety, I'm interested to try and understand how that fits in with ADHD. Does ADHD, has that caused depression? Has that caused anxiety? Or does anxiety lead into the ADHD? What's your view on
this is purely my view, but I definitely think that ADHD doesn't help anxiety and depression, because your mind is never turning off. You're overthinking constantly. You're working everything through in your head. Little things can become big things, and especially if it's in your own head. Once it goes around the first pass, and you're thinking again, something really, you know, you'll think of something even worse, and it will spiral again. It will continue to go down spiraling. I guess one of my mechanisms is I talk to my wife, I mean, openly about everything. So when my mind is starting to go into places that it shouldn't, I'll have a conversation with her, and she'll kind of laugh and tell me that the chances of me falling off the side of Kilimanjaro are very low, you know. But that's the sort of thing. But I definitely think when your mind is very busy, if you are in that negative headspace, it's just going to amplify it.
And do you nowadays, or in the past, have you sought to focus on depression separately from ADHD, from anxiety, and done specific things related to that? Because myself, I would say that I've never had anxiety, but I've definitely had depression. And you know, they seem quite distinct to me, whereas a lot of people, it goes hand in hand, and they see it completely, you know, connected. What's your sort of view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think ADHD is I think depression and anxiety are a symptom of it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That if I allow myself through ADHD to go into those places, they become something. Whereas if I'm managing my core self, you know, if I'm mindful of my mental health and I keep that strong every day, I'm less likely to go into those places, if that makes sense. But my ADHD is a constant. That's not changing.
Yeah.
I can't rewrite that DNA, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But anxiety and depression are a symptom of my mental health. The minute that's why I've become really mindful these days of how I am. I know that I feel better when I eat properly, when I sleep properly, and I get some exercise. Those are my key things that probably keep my mental health positive, on top of all the other stuff I do. But with those, you know, putting time and effort into myself, that has supported where my head is at. I know that the ADHD is that constant, that's who I am. I guess it's kind of like having dark hair or a beard. It's just your thing. But where I allow my brain to go is kind of the thing I now sort of be really careful of.
Okay. It sounds, I mean, with depression and stuff I've done in terms of talks, courses, books I've written on it, one of the main things I say is for everybody to have their own individual toolbox, something that they can go to with a whole range of different options that are going to work for them at that particular time, that they know will work and be the right thing. And that takes a lot of time to build that toolbox, a lot of time to practice, to apply those and to be an expert on those different tools. You mentioned with yourself, it's getting good sleep, doing some exercise, and eating well. Three very, very important but quite simple, straightforward areas. Is that your toolbox, or do you have a load of other things as well?
That's the beginning of my toolbox. I think that's the core. I mean, they are self-love, aren't they? They are the things that you will do that will make your life better, very simply, without doing anything else. I think in my toolbox is also those little things that you do that, you know, that kindness of giving back, That's spending time with good people that are good for you. I mean, I also think it's worth mentioning that ADHD isn't a one size fits all. I'm incredibly lucky that, I'm a point where, and maybe this is through my own mindfulness, but I can operate at work. I'm really good at what I do at work. I don't have any major addictions. There aren't
and you have a good employer.
I have a great employer who's
Yeah.
very understanding. I'm able to function at a high level, but there are people out there who are not at that level, and it completely debilitates them. And I think it's worth calling out that again, it's your own situation, individual situation. Like you said though, it's about building that toolbox of things that work for you, that support you, that move that dial every day into be a little bit better. There's no easy quick fix to any of it. It's like depression, isn't it?
I know. Just thought there was, you mentioned about your dad saying you've got to do more things, try more things.
Yep.
And you won't necessarily know what the best tool in the toolbox will be unless you try things.
Yes.
And there may be things that don't work. But that's good because you know that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And there's things you wouldn't know that will work, which does. So that element of trying things, whether that's someone suggesting something or you hearing about something or thinking what could work yourself, trying new things. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You've learned. If it does, great, use it. Become an expert in it. So
his advice was to just say yes. And this is probably a perfect example of that. You reached out and I said, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
And it's now I embrace that on a daily basis. To how many times you can say yes to things that you just that are out of your comfort zone. But like you said, even if it doesn't work, you're proud that you've tried it, that you've said yes, you've embraced it. You never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. They took me to Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
If I hadn't said yes, I still think I'm just crazy for doing that.
I mean, I suspect, as I said before, I've never really had anxiety. I suspect people with anxiety, that would be much harder to do, much harder to say yes to, much because they're naturally going to be more anxious about the situation, the outcome, what's going to happen.
Yep.
But the advice is sensibly, but do it, go for it.
I mean, the things that really upset your life are the stuff that you never see coming anyway. We can, with anxiety, it's always worse in your head than the reality of it. We've all made it through those days that you just feel like you can't, and you come out the other side of that. And I think for me, overcoming anxiety was that ability to trust myself again, that no matter what was thrown at me, I would figure a way of pulling the pieces together. Probably 18 months ago, my car got wiped out in the snow, and it was devastating. And for about 5 minutes, I sat there and was devastated. I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to move the car, and my brain started going off into this complete tangent of mess. And then, weirdly enough, my ADHD brain kicks in and goes, because my ADHD brain is a problem solver. It wants to solutionize on everything. So it started pulling things together, going, right, well, we can ring the garage and we can get this sorted and we can do this. And that, within an hour, I was back to level-headed again, and you overcome that thing. But it's that trust in yourself that whatever is thrown at you, you'll be okay. Yeah. And that, the stuff that your brain is telling you, and it's getting worse and worse, is not real. There potentially might be, and there's this tiny little chance that it might be. Yeah. But there's also a massive thing of it never happening. All the stuff that we think is the worst thing that's ever going to happen has never happened.
Yeah. And also, I'm a big believer that, through life, you can't go through life without adversity, without difficulties, without struggles, without hardship, without stuff going wrong and not how you like it. Yet we live in a world, especially nowadays, it feels like we're so overly protective. Don't try that. Be careful. Watch out. And that only increases anxiety and reduces confidence in terms of the evidence to say you can get through something, can deal with something. And we're seemingly going in one direction. Yeah. Overly protective, be careful, don't do that, fear, anxiety, and the things that help with that, the resilience, dealing with the struggles, building the confidence, that's going down, and that's a concern. Yeah. So, if people
but you don't grow without the struggle. that's the area.
That's where you learn from.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I have I mean, you talk about that, and I very much. I had my mum come say this at the weekend, and I know that I parent very differently to my mum now. My daughter gets 2 bits of advice every single morning. She gets told to be kind and be brave, that step into places where she's a bit afraid, and to embrace it. And you know, when we're playing anything, she's told that, yeah, if we're playing on the PlayStation and it's a bit tough, she's asked to try it, because that's how she'll go, not to give up easily.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I'm bringing her up in that mindset of embracing challenge, because challenge is great. I think that's where I need that now. I'm learning that you know, turning 50, could I walk for 4 days across the Sahara, climb Mount Toolbox and do Everest in 1 year? And you realise actually you can, but it's that going into my headspace and going, I'm going to stretch myself, because when I stretch myself, that's when I'm at my happiest.
And also, you're setting a really good example, because you're a role model, a parent. People, you know, children look up, and whether they're not necessarily copy, but they'll look, and you're setting a good example. I mean, I find myself, I don't know how old your daughter is. My daughter's 6, and what I just talked about in terms of overprotection and being careful, naturally there is be careful, watch out for that. Yeah. And then I find myself thinking, this sounds terrible, almost I want you to fall over and hurt yourself, because that, you know, you're going to be okay. It's not going to be nice for a little while, but that builds a bit more toughness and strength. You know where
your limits are then, don't you?
Well, yeah, all of that stuff. And it does concern me, and I find myself at times feeling almost a hypocrite, saying, come on, you've got to push yourself and, you know, embrace the struggles, the bad things, but be careful, don't do that. So yeah, it's a difficult one, but I think, you know, as a parent, you know, you want to be a good role model, you want to set examples, and what you're doing and what you just talked about in terms of going out and the challenges and stuff like that is great. Is there a concern at all that she may have ADHD, or, you know?
She has. I mean, she has. And
is that a concern, again, or are you quite happy?
I think myself and my wife have talked about this. And again, my wife is incredible that she's got the toolkit and she understands it. Myself and my daughter talk about busy brains a lot, that how we calm ourselves down from that. We talk about breathing a lot. I embrace her for everything she is, and I love the fact that she's different and creative. We don't know for sure if it's ADHD, which she's still only 5.
Okay.
But I think I'm definitely parenting different, with understanding myself now that where she is busy and she gets excited and she has to see things through to the end, that we embrace that and we allow that. We bring her up, you know, with that in mind, that she can be whoever she wants to be, and she is completely herself. Yeah. I think the piece you talked about before about inspiring people and that stuff, I tend to not embrace that. I don't think ego brings out the best version of me. I think when I start down that ego road, I definitely lose a part of me that's the good piece. I'm better when I'm humble.
But when, so the things you're doing, you're not doing it for look at me, are you? You're doing it for all the right reasons.
You are, yeah.
So,
but I think I tend to not embrace it. I kind of allow myself days every now and again where the last day of the trip, when it's done, I'll go off on my own and I'll have a day where I'll just emotionally sort of accept it. And you do. Last week, I was invited up to the London Stadium and I won the UK fundraising champion for bananas for the UK. Wow. And again, it was not something I got my head around. It was one of those things. I'm getting better at accepting the inspiring things I do, if that makes sense. But I think because I don't make a big deal out of it, I think it probably makes it better, if that makes sense. Yeah, you're right. My daughter's growing up with a dad who goes to Everest on a regular basis, goes to the Sahara, and that's her horizon now. That's her targets, and that's what she just assumes is normal, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, and you've got plenty more things coming up.
My bucket list, the top of my bucket list, is to do Everest with her when she's 18.
Wow. Okay.
Because just to open her mind at that age, that she can do anything, I think would be, and to spend 2 weeks just wandering and waffling with her would be hilarious.
Yeah. I might potentially be a year ahead of you if I do that with my daughter. So let's talk about some of the negative things then in terms of relationships, friendships, being social, all those elements. Because I think in a really good way, we've talked about quite a lot of the positives of ADHD. And at the start, you did talk about there's plenty of negatives. So what has been the impact, the negatives, the problems that it's caused with friendships and relationships? And
I think when we talk about relationships, it's interesting when you look back. Now I know who I am. You can see why things didn't work, because I am hard work. You know, I'm on the go all the time, and that's exhausting for people who are with me. I'm very lucky that my wife has an understanding of who I am and has helped me on my journey. And is also able to push back on me when needed. And I think where I haven't embraced myself before or understood myself, that's had the negative impact. Because if I don't know who I am, how are they supposed to know who I am? They only get a version of me that's kind of broken and not quite there. And I think now that I've completely embraced who I am, I think that it's a better version of me. But in the past, and I think not even in the past, even now, like my wife has the ability to tell me when I'm too much and to push back. And I think that if I hadn't had that in the past, that's why things have fallen apart, because I'm just too much.
Okay.
And it's not that you're too much, it's just who you are. It's just that people aren't sometimes prepared for all who you are.
But is there then quite it's very important for the other person or other people to have an understanding.
Yeah.
To know anything. And it's like with so many conditions, if people understand, that's the reason, it makes sense, I can deal with that, as opposed to, well, why are they behaving like that? Or I mean, in a very different way, but there's similarities. Menopause. I mean, that's one of the topics on Lived Insights, and as you might imagine, I've not experienced menopause, but I've started to get a really good insight into people who have through the questionnaires, and it's like, wow, a lot of things make a lot more sense now, understanding a bit more about it. So I imagine it's a similar thing, but you're reliant upon the other people to have that understanding and knowledge.
I think there's a few things. I think before, when I thought I was broken, you're embarrassed by that. You don't want to talk about being broken. You don't want to talk about that. So you're less open with your feelings. If you're having a bad day or you're feeling just awful, you don't want to do anything, you're probably more likely to react to that than you are to sit there and be open about your feelings and your emotions, because you don't really understand them yourself. And then when you're not understanding them, how are you going to share that with anybody? I think that's been one of the biggest things for me now, is to be open about how I feel. The fact we're sitting here and I'm openly chatting about it, it makes it easier for people to be with me now, because they can I can articulate how I'm feeling, and that, I guess, when I'm frustrated or busy in my head, I can share that.
Okay.
And I think I haven't been able to do that in the past.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And the fact that there is a lot more openness about it, people talking about it, a bit more knowledge, a bit more understanding. I still think there's so much people don't know.
Yes.
I mean, has there been, you talked about you haven't suffered any sort of stigma or any negative comments since you've been talking about it, which is great, but are there things that people could say that would be bad, as in some of the stigmas or some of the negative connotations of ADHD?
Yeah. I think when, again, it's that piece around, if you allow it to rule your life, it's easy to slip into addictions. It's easy to slip into negative behaviours, to do things that you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And you can see that having I mean, I was wild as a child. I was sort of disappearing off and clubbing at 14 in London, and because my brain just wanted, I was friendly and got on with people, but craving new stimulus, new environments. So I was always really curious, but you could see that being perceived as naughty and wrong, and do that, and you're doing it for all the right reasons. But yeah, definitely, that probably didn't help my parents back then when I look back.
Well, yeah.
I wasn't a naughty child. I just disappeared London clubbing.
Misunderstood.
Yeah,
that's
busy.
The term. Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we are fortunate in the sense that nowadays it's much more talked about, more open. What would your advice be to anyone listening, watching this, who've heard some of the things you've talked about, and they're like, some of that resonates, some of that sounds familiar, some of that, that's me. I mean, what would your advice to them be?
Absolutely embrace all of it. I think if any of this is resonating with you, my best advice is start to research ADHD. There's a million.
What was the podcast that you went?
So I stumbled across ADHD Adults UK, which is this wonderful little charity. But the first 3 episodes in, and they talked about diagnosis, they talked about symptoms, they talked about medication, they talked about, little things that I couldn't understand but now make absolute sense. Emotional dysfunction. So in our family, if somebody dies, I don't get emotionally tied into that. I go into a problem-solving mode. Right. And I plan a funeral and I ring everybody. And then about 4 weeks later, it hits me. While everybody else is absolutely devastated, for some bizarre reason, I feel nothing. But when I started reading that was a symptom of ADHD, you suddenly realise that that's a part of me that my brain just doesn't compute what that emotion is until afterwards.
Okay.
But my advice to anybody is absolutely go off and get the insight and understanding of what ADHD is.
Yep.
That website, that podcast was brilliant because it talked to me in a way with people who had ADHD. And then sit down and look at what things that they are talking about relates to yourself and be really open and really honest about it, because there's no hiding from this. It's who you are. And then start to embrace that and start to look at, are there things that you need to change and put in place? I know that if I'm left to my own devices, I will take on too many projects and I will run myself into the ground. Okay. So I now know that I have to be really disciplined about, I can only take so much on. Yep. Because otherwise the downside of that is that I'll crash. Yep. And nothing gets done. Yep. But it's about understanding yourself and then what symptoms are applying to you, because there are so many symptoms and that it's different for everybody.
As you said, you self-diagnose, you haven't got a formal diagnosis. My understanding is that's not an easy process, getting a formal diagnosis, as in it can take a lot of time, a lot of effort. It could be quicker if you go private, then there's the cost. And I've heard various stories about that. And it feels, as from what you've said, that being self-diagnosed, being very confident that's what it is, that's more than enough. You don't need a formal diagnosis. But some people may need that or want that. Would you advise that they persevere, go for it, or would you say don't worry, just go and do your own research? Because it's a difficult one, because the diagnosis, if it's going to take a lot of time and effort, could make things worse before potentially making things better. You're an example of someone who hasn't had a formal diagnosis, doesn't need one. What's your view on the whole diagnosis?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want one. I've researched it, I've embraced it. Mm-hmm. I am functioning, and now that I understand myself, I love myself. Mm-hmm. I don't want to change myself. I don't need medication to turn off my brain. I've just learnt to deal with this. But that's me. I mean, I am probably an exception to the rule. I think diagnosis depends on a number of things. How badly you're struggling. So there's a simple 10-question self-assessment that you can do initially that tells you whether you're on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think if you go through the NHS, it's about 5 years on a waiting list. And then a psychiatrist will do a one-on-one interview and tell you whether you are ADHD or not. It's a completely subjective test. Okay. And then you can start looking at medication. Okay. If you go private, I think it starts at about 400 quid and goes up to $2,000, depending on what you want. And you can do that very quickly. But I guess it depends on how badly your ADHD is affecting you. If you are really struggling, if you are not able to make it through the day, if you are, the symptoms are so bad, get the help that you need. Start with a GP, start that journey, because that will change your world. I think it all depends on individual circumstances and how badly it's affecting them in life. I mean, for me, I'm very lucky that I'm able, through mindfulness and through the techniques that I've developed, I can live with it, and it makes me probably better. But there's still days that I struggle.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's who I am, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I didn't know what to expect from this conversation. I was looking forward to hearing a bit more about the ADHD. It's really nice to hear how much you've embraced it and how positive it is, despite the difficulties, despite the struggles, all those years of stuff happening. So firstly, thank you for coming on here. I'm sure everyone who's listening and watching will get something out of that. And for anyone who this does resonate with, can understand, what a great example. Find out more yourself, do more research. The more knowledge, more understanding people have, that will help, and hopefully this will be part of that. But yeah, I mean, it's just great that such a condition that we now know is very common has got getting the attention, getting the notice, and now we've got so much more knowledge. So thank you again, Trevor.
Thank you.
Good luck. Enjoy all the challenges you've got ahead of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, perhaps I'll see you on one of them.
We'll have to go hiking again soon.
So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed that episode of Lived Insights. Tune in for many other episodes on different topics and check out their website, livedinsights.com.